Okay, episode 9, we're recording. And so you were saying about the nihilism.
Well, did you want to do the greeting?
Welcome back.
Welcome everybody
Yeah,
back.
episode 9. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and comment, like, share. All right.
Yeah, let us know what your thoughts are. We need the feedback in order to know how to connect with the audience. We don't see your faces and we don't hear your applause or your boos, so it leaves us in a bit of a vacuum. Help us out.
All right, so nihilism.
And nihilism in the evolution of human consciousness was the topic that I was thinking about. And
Well, what do you mean by nihilism?
uh,
Like when you,
say
like,
again.
what's your definition of nihilism? What does that mean?
Well, I think you'd probably be more articulate with that. Um, uh, it'll be clear. It'll be clear for the viewers if you give the definition than if
Well,
I
from like
do.
an ethical standpoint, I see like nihilism as sort of similar to social Darwinism, right? So there is no like general sense of morality. It's all like natural law, survival of the fittest. There is no meaning or value in life, right? That's handed down by a greater power or God or anything like
Yeah.
that. And
Well, there's an if then therefore, and we're referring to, and there's multiple therefores that come from a life is meaningless. Therefore, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter because there isn't a God that's going to hold you accountable.
right,
And so that's where it shows up in terms of ethics or morality.
there are people who
And
say they're nihilistic though
anti
that aren't.
say
There are
again.
people who would identify as being a nihilist, but also have a sense of ethics too. So it's kind of confusing.
Well, that would be a different like, and that goes into one of the points that I think is very relevant to today, not just an academic or historical perspective on philosophy. In this case, nihilism as a philosophy, is that it if there's no meaning to life and there's no uh, um, cosmic accountability or a God that's going to hold us accountable, if there's no hell, uh, we can go two ways. Therefore, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't matter. Or I can go to, therefore, I better be the one that's paying attention. And I need to be looking into myself as to, what does it mean to me, which is the stage of evolution of the consciousness, is what does the meaningless of life mean to me? What do I do if that's my truth, that life is meaningless? Then how am I going to respond to that? And I can respond at least in two ways, of multiple others. One of them is, therefore I do whatever I feel like doing. However, neurotic acting out is fine. Or the other one, I can go, therefore I need to be deciding for myself what I think is a way to live my life, which then that calls on agency, which we've talked a fair amount about. I exercise my agency to fit my ethics.
Yeah.
And so I see nihilism, the hopelessness, going back to your earlier question, what does nihilism mean to me? And it got clear for me is that it's hopelessness, that there's nothing out there that is going to intervene in my life. I have no obligation to anything out there because there's nothing out there can hold me accountable.
Well, I said like maybe
Which I
there's
think,
three. Let's say in a spectrum, you could say in one end of the spectrum you have like realism, right? Like purpose is real, morality is real, because it was created by God, and its mode of existence is something like related
yeah,
to the
but that
soul or
that assigns
spiritual, right? So that's one
Exactly.
side, and nihilism would be the exact opposite. There is no meaning. There is no purpose to anything. All the ways in which we ascribe value or purpose or meaning to anything are culturally relative and meaningless. In the end, they have no objective existence, right? And there is no God.
Yeah.
And
In the nihilistic perspective,
there's a middle way, like a middle approach, which is like Nagarjuna again. He had his book Fundamentalism of the Middle Way. He's like a Buddhist philosopher. He talks about how there's a way to sort of meet in the middle, to where you could say, well, meaning and purpose, they exist, in a state of contingency, right? So since we feel things, we feel meaning, we feel purpose, right? They have an existence in our consciousness, but there's just no objective existence. So they exist in a state of contingency, and they're dependent on cultural meaning systems and stuff like that. So you don't have to say they do exist, but they just weren't created by God, right? So
yeah, I understand, and I like your structure there. That's a very useful framework that you have. And so where I am on that is I'm commenting about that middle way, and that we're in maybe still the early stages, but a few thousand years into that middle way, where we discover that there's no God out there that's telling us what to do. And we have then the extreme opposite of that is that we don't have to do anything. That we just do whatever we feel like doing and acting out. And we still have a lot of that kind of behavior, very neurotic acting out. Our society as a whole is extremely neurotic. Just look at the marketplace and the tactics that are used to manipulate people's emotions so that you can make more transactions. Ultimately, it has to do with some kind of ego gratification, either with your bank account or market share or whatever. But the atrocities that are committed in the marketplace through public relations is an acting out of something that's extremely neurotic. And it has no accountability to any kind of authority, external authority. And it doesn't even have any accountability to an internal authority, unless it would be greed. It certainly seems to be accountable to greed. Just to illustrate what I'm saying as to where we are in the evolution of human consciousness, and we're in a place where we can look around and notice how dysfunctional we are as a species. We can do the same thing with the biosphere and the damage that we do to the biosphere. But this is my point is that this is like one step slightly away from nihilism, back to something that has meaning. But you made a point that I think is a really big point, and that is that purpose does exist. It's just not assigned from out there.
Well, out there in terms of culture,
every
just not. Out externally, it's culturally derived, right? So it's people can create their own purpose and their own meaning personally. They want to be in there, but a lot of our sense of purpose and meaning and self-esteem comes from a sort of collectivist sort of.
But whether I buy it from the social store, buy a purpose that's handed to me from some cultural factor, or I form it within myself. Purpose doesn't exist out there. There's no purpose in the store. I can take what the store says, society says, I can buy into that, right? And create my purpose. But the source of purpose, from my perspective, the source of purpose is the human psyche. It's a function of our own consciousness. But it's not out there. And so throughout history, it's being projected out there as God tells me what to do. God gives me purpose without recognizing, wait a minute, it's not my purpose until I choose that it be my purpose. So we're at that stage of waking up to our own creativity, our own capacity to create purpose from within. But because of the things we've talked about in the past, about all the existential angst that comes out of free will and agency, there's a lot of hold. Wait a minute, do I want to deal with the responsibility for deciding what the purpose of my life is? For a lot of people, the answer is no.
Can we?
And I don't see a problem with that.
Let's step back for just a second, though, because I want to.
Yeah.
So if we just we can use biology, right? Evolution by natural selection, and how organisms have become so much more complex to the point where with humans we became self-aware, right? Now, there's a natural process, that has taken place over the last billion years that has designed these machines and computers we live in, right? Our bodies. Now, if you were going to try to create a biological structure like this using science, right? A man-made one. I mean, we can barely, grow a couple cells in a petri dish at this point, right? So it's like the human creativity and ingenuity is nothing compared to evolution by natural selection in terms of creating biological systems, right? We're not even close.
Right.
Similarly, we have existential needs, right? We have the fear of death, the fear of freedom, all these sort of things, and the sort of what was it say? The evolutionary response to this need is meaning, right? Culturally derived meaning systems, and a lot of these come from culture and religion and these sort of things, and sort of the narratives or the myths that take hold are selected in a similar way as biological systems are selected by natural selection, right?
Yeah, right. So that would be the evolution of culture.
Right, and so
am I following you?
Right, and so what I'm saying is, it's like similarly, like in a similar way that we're nothing compared to nature in creating biological systems, right? I think we're still at a very infantile sort of point in being able to create our own meaning systems that are going to have, the an impact strong enough to sort of help us overcome our own existential needs and stuff like that. And we are completely still dependent on culturally derived meaning systems. And so I think what you're talking about, though, is sort of stepping back from the culturally derived meaning systems and taking a more conscious approach to creating your own meaning systems, right?
A more self-aware approach. More conscious, as in self-aware.
And a step in this process of the evolution of human consciousness that you're talking about is this nihilism, right? It's almost like the dismissal of all...
To me, nihilism is the catalyst that sets off this whole thing we're talking about.
Right. So it's almost like getting rid of the old, right? Of the old culturally and sort of, you could say, naturally selected cultural meaning systems, rejecting those, saying there is no meaning, there is no purpose, there is no value, right? Is a step, and then because there's still going to be a need, right? You're still going to have questions about the origins of the universe, the meaning to your life, the purpose, all this sort of stuff, right?
What triggers the need or emotion for purpose is still going to be at play, because that's another thing that has evolved in human consciousness. I don't know that the critters contemplate purpose of their life.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think that tends to be certainly the advanced primates, but probably unique to human beings, is this urge to have a sense of purpose. not all human beings have that urge. That they're content with life, and it's like I don't know what my purpose is. I do what I do. I go do my job. You know, and there's like take care of my family. Well, that's a purpose, but they don't. You know what I mean? They don't think of it as the meaning of life or the purpose of life is what they do. They don't see what they do as being an expression of their sense of purpose.
I think it's related, though. It's a piece of it.
Well, yeah. I whether we see the connection or not, the function is still there. Whether we see the function or not, it's still there. Now,
can I finish my point? Let me finish my point of what I was saying when I was doing the comparison between the biology and the. So it's dangerous, like say, to go in and start screwing with biological systems when we're not, all that advanced, right?
When we don't really understand the system.
And I think it's dangerous also to start screwing with cultural meaning systems and religion. I think nihilism is dangerous, right? It's because we haven't developed the skill yet to replace it with anything that's going to have the same impact as religion and culturally derived meaning systems. And so just by checking it all out, you're kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And there's two, you could say, like, culture and negation are the two ways that we deal with existential crisis, right? So during times of cultural decay, which we're going through right now, where the cultural meaning systems are decaying, they don't hold any weight or power anymore, people become overly dependent on having external negation objects, enemies, right? So you have a projection object where you can project all your fears and guilt and all this kind of stuff, and then, by wiping out your enemy, you're conquering your own existential anxiety and fear of death and all that kind of stuff, right? And so it's like when you go through periods of cultural decline, usually that means an increase in violence, in the need for external negation objects.
Yeah.
So it's like a dangerous, if we don't have anything to replace the culture we're destroying with, we risk being in a situation where there's going to be genocide or war or something like that.
I follow you.
I think that's the only point I wanted to make. Just that, yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess I'm at the. What does what we've dumped on the table here? What does it mean? In terms of day-to-day life. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to you? Is kind of the relevant question. And
I think I'm a nihilist. So,
well, the thing is these different philosophies, different perspectives, they have to do with context, personal context. They have to do with the part of our psyche that creates meaning and significance to what we observe. And so we have different perspectives, we have different contexts. And I think of them as a seasoning rack with bottles of seasoning. There's some oregano and some salt and pepper and garlic and, go on and on and on. And if we see philosophies as something that we can use to season our way of understanding the world around us, ourselves and our relationship with the world around us, that if we lock in and only use one perspective, one context for viewing the world, then we end up with myopia. It's very narrow. And in the culinary reference, that it would be it would have too much garlic in it, or too much salt. It lacks blend. It lacks middle way of balance. So all of the different philosophical perspectives, I think, can be seen as we use a little bit of nihilism, we use a little bit of optimism, we use a little bit of I'm at a blank, but anyway, the whole list of various types of philosophy. We use a little bit of agency. We use a little bit of that we have no willpower. That's part of nihilism, I think, is that there's no such thing as free will, right? And that's part of the baby that gets thrown out with the bathwater with nihilism. Uh, our free will doesn't go away because we decide we don't have it. We'd still exercise our agency. It's just that it's not part of what we consider. If our belief system, our philosophy filters out all evidence of free will, and our only way of seeing the world is in terms of cause and effect, and we're just a tooth on a gear in a machine, then we're not going to be aware of that part of ourselves that does have free will.
So when you brought it up, the nihilism thing, so you see it as like a positive step forward, or what was?
I see nihilism as a necessity for where human consciousness is going, and that there's evolution behind everything we're talking about here. There's evolution that forms culture, and culture evolves over time. But culture is kind of an effect of the aggregate of state of mind. The collective state of mind is what creates culture. So it comes back to individual people making individual choices. They create an aggregate, and whatever is the prevailing consensus is, the most influential consensus among the masses of people, that is what we would call the prevailing culture. But then we have what we call subcultures, which is the people who have a different culture than the prevailing culture. And so that's part of it too. So
Can I bring up a point? I think
sure.
So then this will get into like what I wanted to talk about a little bit, but I told you about the Sound of Freedom movie already, right? So basically, it's this guy. He was CIA or whatever, and then after 9/11, he joined Homeland Security when they made that, and he worked counterterrorism for a little bit. And then they asked him if he wanted to head up a. He was a special agent, head up a group that goes after child sex traffickers, right, and they arrest people for child porn and stuff like that. So, anyways, there was an interview with him, the subject of the person in real life, right? The movie was about, and this guy named, you know who Jordan Peterson is?
Yeah.
Okay, so Jordan Peterson was interviewing him, right? And he was asking him questions about, because he saw horrific things, right? Terrible, like things you couldn't even possibly imagine happening to kids, right? And he was asking him if he suffered from PTSD, and he said, yeah, he does suffer bad from PTSD, because one of the things that would happen when he was watching like the child porn and stuff like that, that he had to take transcripts and stuff for court and do the investigation, so he actually had to physically watch it, and he'd see kids getting bones broken and just horrible things. But he said he couldn't help, for some reason he couldn't help but superimpose the faces of his children on the children he saw on the screen, and it just gave him nightmares and really screwed him up, right? Gave him bad PTSD. And then Jordan Peterson, he's a clinical psychologist, right? He used to be a professor of psychology in this Canadian school. Anyways, he was talking, and he studied a lot about like Nazism and different violence, stuff like that. And so he was talking about PTSD, and he says a lot of people who experience suffering don't get PTSD, but there's something unique about experiencing suffering or experiencing what you would call evil that creates PTSD, right? And that one of the ways a person who experiences these kind of evil, like this guy here, is by taking almost a childlike worldview, right? So it's almost like regressing into this ultra-religious worldview, where you see the nature of humanity as a fight against good and evil, right? And so you can place the horrors that happen, sort of in you can project that onto Satan or some evil force or something like that. And by taking a stance where you are fighting against evil, as for God, or good against evil, you're good. By taking that like sort of childlike sort of worldview, a lot of people are able to overcome and cope with their PTSD, and actually, they're able to make them more effective in doing jobs like this when they're encountering these just horrific things, right?
Uh
Um,
huh.
and so, like right now, we live in a very, I mean, it's a lot of drama that goes on right now, but relatively peaceful period, right? Like you don't have to worry about going outside and getting blown up, or there's no genocide taking place in the
Well,
U.S.
some of us, a lot of it, kind of a
Right,
secure.
right, but
But then, if you're in Ukraine, you never know if you're going to be coming home.
right, and I bet in Ukraine or a lot of the Middle East, they're
Yeah,
hyper
right.
religious at this point, probably right now, right, and so it's like these in times of peace and relative comfort is when like a lot of these cultural myths or religious myths and stuff like that, they start to be rejected. You know what I mean? Because you don't need them that much. But
Well,
when the
yeah,
shit hits the fan,
as
right,
the anxiety goes down, the need for the coping mechanisms
right.
would go down, and yeah, and
And so after, like, if you look at American culture, after World War II, you had the baby boomers. You had this sort of modern 1950s housewife sort of middle class culture that was developed and stuff like that.
yeah,
So,
the
like,
Leave It to Beaver.
right after tragedy, there's there's a cultural renaissance, right? Like we talked about this before, the cultural life cycles.
Yeah,
And then after the renaissance, usually there's a period of normalization, then decay, and then there's destruction. And I think that in the phase we're at right now is decay, and we're getting close to destruction, right? So it could just be part of what you're seeing as part of the normal cultural life cycle, where we almost forget why do we have culture to begin with? It's stupid, blah blah blah. We get rid of it, then we have all of our angst thrust back upon us. There's all this negation that happens, violence and shit. And it's like, oh
yeah.
yeah,
The need for culture then reemerges
right,
in our
exactly,
awareness.
yeah,
And all of that you're describing, I see that in the context of evolution. That cyclical thing that you described, the development and then the decay and the violence, and that whole cycle is one iteration of how culture evolves. So I
yeah.
see it. I see it
Culture,
as a process of evolution. And when I say evolution, what I mean is a process of natural selectivity for what works better.
now,
Now
when you say
it
culture,
looks like it's very dysfunctional, and it is very dysfunctional, but I don't go, therefore it's not moving in the direction of something better. I put it in the context of that each iteration of that that emerging, building up, decaying, the violence, that each iteration of that cycle moves the natural selectivity process further forward, and that we're moving in the direction of, I think it would be adequate to say we're moving in the direction of greater civility, without getting too woo-woo about it. But my thought, it takes me back to the concept of the Aquarian conspiracy, and that we're moving in, as a species, we're evolving in the direction of greater peace, love, and understanding. And I think overall, uh, in any group of people or globally, the entirety of humanity, we have a larger percentage of the population is striving for greater civility now than in the past. I don't have the means to do the research to support that with numbers, but that is my intuitive sense of what's going on. Now, maybe that's just what's going on for me, and I'm, one of a few people who imagine it that way. But I'm still convinced that no, there there's a lot, there is a movement, there is an Aquarian conspiracy, and we are evolving, and I think we have been evolving. And when we look at the power of religion and all the destruction that that power has been used for throughout history, we can also look at the power of religion and how there's a common denominator with religions that are moving us to greater civility, to
You mean
greater
like the
peace, love, and
morality?
understanding.
What's
But it
what's the
takes
common denominator of the religions you're talking about?
just what I said is that the there's a common denominator that runs through all of the religions that I've studied that advocate compassion
Okay, yeah, okay.
and understanding. Compassion is probably a good single word to use. My word is love. Mutual, a commitment to, a drive to greater mutual benefit, to focus on the mutual rather than the either or. In terms of, if we're going to describe, well, where is the human consciousness evolving from and to? It's away from the conflict between self and other, even if it's a collective self, a tribe, and an other tribe, moving away from that more into a more harmonious way of living. And what I observe is that the people who are caught up in the negation object thing, where they have to have an enemy and they have to be in conflict, those people are killing each other off.
A lot of it's taking place digitally now, which is interesting.
Well, yeah. But the thing is violence tends to kill off violence. And after it's expended all of its energy, and it just isn't enough to go anymore, and so then what's left stops fighting. And then meanwhile there are people that are evolving and learning throughout their lifetime and passing what they learn on to their posterity, that peace, love, and understanding is a more sustainable way to live your life. So I'm convinced that's where human consciousness is evolving, is into something that is more sustainable.
Well, can I paraphrase what you're saying a little bit?
Sure, yeah, no, that would be
say
excellent.
it in a different way.
Yeah.
So let's see. Let's just say culture is there because it meets a need, right?
Right.
So some of those needs are, like, let's say, the fear of death, the fear of all the existential crap we've been talking about so far, right?
Right.
Now, we've also talked about there seems to be an antidote to a lot of that stuff, because a lot of the problems we're dealing with relating to our own personal will and to death and stuff like that, these are just different forms of anxieties, right? And now there are, like, known therapies for anxiety, like cognitive behavioral, right, where you confront death and you can do all these kind of things. And then there seems to be some benefit to practicing compassion and, like, practicing forgiveness and empathy and all these sort of things.
Right. We've talked about that.
They have an anxiety reducing effect on the individual for some reason when they practice them, right?
They do.
Now, so as the culture evolves in sort of people who, let's see, evolves to incorporate these behaviors as more of everyday sort of normal practice, the
behaviors of compassion,
right, these positive behaviors.
Yeah. Okay.
The anxiety that is driving the formation of culture and negation, the need to negate and stuff like that, becomes undermined, right? And so it sort of like is addressing the cause and not the symptom. So the cause being this anxiety, but these needs that we have relating to anxiety and terror and stuff like that aren't the only needs humans have, right? There seems to be, like, an intense curiosity there seems to be a need to serve a purpose outside of existential purpose, but to serve a purpose, right? To make a difference in the world in some way. There seems to be like just boredom,
Yeah.
right? The need to want, yeah. So there's all these other needs that also influence culture, right?
Uh-huh.
But maybe the evolution you're talking about, to where maybe the formation of culture has been dominated by these sort of needs relating to terror, and over time those are subduing because we're kind of figuring out how to undermine these by practicing the Aquarian conspiracy stuff, as you would call it, and now these other components of our consciousness, curiosity, serving purpose, and all these kind of things are sort of taking over as a driving force in the formation of culture, maybe.
I
Or
think
maybe
that
having more of a.
I think there's more curiosity when we're in a secure place than when we're in a violent place. Certainly it's a different kind of curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, is that what you're talking about when in terms of the culture is evolving?
I think human consciousness is evolving, and as a result of the evolution of our consciousness, our cultures will evolve to accommodate that.
It's a feedback loop, isn't it?
I don't see consciousness as the first cause. That it doesn't have a cause. It is the cause. It's not the effect of something. It's the cause of
Wait, what's the cause?
Else. Huh?
What's the cause? Did you say
I
consciousness?
still didn't get it.
You said, I didn't catch it. Were you saying culture is the cause, or you said consciousness is the cause?
Culture. I don't see culture as not having a cause. I see culture as an effect.
Definitely, yeah.
It is a cause, but I don't see it only as a cause.
Right.
It's not a pure genesis of the beginning of something, and it's the effect of human consciousness. So if we look around at society and whatever structure or order we have, what are the beliefs and the values and the knowledge? That's what forms culture, right? Prevailing attitudes, prevailing intentions. Those are all cultural elements. But when we look around, we're looking at the aggregate of the dominant context of individual people. The consensus of the most influential people is what prevails in society. We look a little bit further, we can see subcultures that have those same elements, but they're not the dominant. They're not the prevailing consensus. They're a consensus that's formed by individual people, but it's a less influential group of people than the prevailing. But the point is that whatever it is we're looking at, whether it's the prevailing culture or a subculture, that's the aggregate of the people who are the source of that culture, and they're also they animate that culture. They bring behavior into that culture, and I think that's a pretty esoteric concept that I'm trying to convey here. At least I don't pick up on very many people recognizing that what I just attempted to explain is that culture is the consequence. It's the aggregate of a group of people. Because we talk about culture like in the workplace, one business, their culture, another business. We talk about business culture in a larger, like the marketplace or the economy, business culture. So, we use this word to refer to something that's going on with groups of people. And that I'm saying that what's going on with groups of people is created by the groups of people. In fact, as I'm jabbering here, I'm remembering an article that you wrote. I think it was brilliant. And basically your article was targeted toward business leadership with the assertion that that if that the people will create the culture.
Yeah.
And if you as a leader, if you don't guide that culture, then you're going to be stuck with the culture that they create for you,
Yeah.
for your business.
Yeah.
In your case, I think it was more the I think it's when you were working for the county. It was when you made this observation, you wrote this paper. But that was that paper is worth publishing, in my opinion, because it points out something that's very, very significant, that's very obscure, esoteric. It just not, it's not known, it's not understood. And I spent 29 years working in organization development, or most of it in organization development, but working with business owners and business leaders. And I was reminded again and again on a day-to-day basis of how accurate that thesis was that you presented in that paper.
So, like, going back, so do you agree that consciousness and culture, there's a positive feedback loop, right? Where consciousness is affecting culture, and culture is affecting consciousness. Okay.
I agree that they're looped. So
yeah,
even consciousness is not first cause substance. It's not that that's the beginning of something, because consciousness is the effect of evolution of everything that's
I
going on
see consciousness
before.
as fundamental.
Well,
in my view.
okay,
Yeah.
now, but we have to hang on to the context here, because I don't disagree with how you're using the term consciousness there as being fundamental. Okay, but what I'm saying is more consciousness, as in self-aware consciousness, individual people, and what individual people are aware of and what they value.
I think maybe quality of consciousness fits there, to where
the quality.
Yeah.
There are different qualities of consciousness. Yeah. But now when I say quality, I'm not talking about good consciousness and bad consciousness.
Yeah, just the qualitative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The quality.
So there's a feedback loop between the quality of consciousness and culture.
Yeah. In fact, I would say that the quality of the culture is a reflection of the quality of the collective consciousness that forms that culture.
Yeah, and when we say quality, we're not talking as in measuring of good or bad, but just the qualitative.
Exactly. Yeah, the nature of the kind of. Yeah. So we could rephrase it this way: the kind of culture that we have is a reflection of the kind of consciousness that formed that culture.
Yeah. And so there's been a lot of studies. I guess that's what propaganda is, or public relations, right? Because public relations used to be called propaganda before World War II. And then,
yeah, right.
Yeah, and the Nazis kind of screwed up that word, and so they changed it to... Edward Bernays coined the term public relations. But
right.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of study and research going into how to create conscious culture and influence culture.
Right.
Mostly by stimulating the unconscious needs of the populations using different sort of cultural mechanisms and media and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's I'm wondering, and so this goes back to the cynicism effect of nihilism, you could say, or the negative effect of nihilism, is that people think in it's okay to manipulate people to make them good consumers for your benefit, right?
Nihilism creates the space for that.
So I've wondered this a lot. It's so if you really wanted to change the world to make it better, if you really wanted to make people make better purchasing decisions and be less destructive to the environment, less dependent on consumer capitalism as a cultural, method. We could, if you put the same amount of energy into educating people as you did into creating good consumers, right? The same amount of money and energy that goes into public relations and propaganda, if you put that into creating a cultural sort of system that in people's participation in that system, they become more empathetic, more compassionate, less destructive to the environment,
Yes.
less dependent on. It seems possible, right? You know what I mean? If we as a society chose to take that on, it's like they went to the moon. There was like all these infrastructure projects that went on right before. Like if we came together as a society and said this is a problem that we're going to solve together, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it'd be.
It's interesting that you use the word "if."
Well, because I don't see us doing it now. I see us getting deeper and deper into like narratives and propaganda and all. Yeah.
That's what interests me about that, because that, to me, there's a bit of an oxymoron there for you, knowing you as well as I know you, and then you're still using the word if we did this or if we did that, right?
I'm saying as a society.
Oh, okay. Well, then, but still, I mean, for me, it's we are. I can see clearly that you're part of this conspiracy that is advocating a more sane, wise, and civil way of being, and being together and being on the planet in the biosystem. Clearly that's your true north. That's your reference point when you're groping with what should I do with this or that or the other. Down at the core of what it is you're trying to sort out is there's a vector there. There's an ethos. And that ethos is headed in the direction of a wiser, more sane, more compassionate, more civil way of living your life. I mean, society, I don't have a lot of control over society, so I don't focus much on, and it's silly when I focus on how am I going to change society. My focus is how am I going to change Arlen. And then as I said that, I realized that, that question is answered. So now I just focus on following my answer.
Well, identity is a spectrum from individual to collective, and so, you can't really extricate yourself from society, right? Because
that's true. That's true. So I'm not speaking in terms. Here, one of the things that frustrates me about language is that it's structured in such a way that it implies absolutes.
Yeah.
When there are no absolutes, it's all, the language is all is and isn't something, and.
Well, I just think a focus on society or trying to change society, I think is important and worthy of time and reflection and effort, I think.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay. And it's because it's part of me too, right?
It's part of what?
Me too. Like, it's part of, like, a culture. The collective is part of who I am, right? It's part of my personal identity.
It certainly influences your identity. It's part of the menu. It's part of the options of how you select what kind of being you want to be, and there's appeal. I've shared some of this in the past in our past conversations where the producer consumerism thing is way out of balance.
Yeah.
And I'm right in there. As in that I still consume stuff just because of this false sense of urgency, a false appetite, and so I'll go ahead and buy something that I don't need it, and I'll get in the car and go on a trip just for the pleasure of it, spewing the carbon into the atmosphere, and so I can't lay any claim to. I can't lay any claim to being a purist about the environment, but I'm still left with I'm still going to answer the question, how then shall I live? My actions will be my answer to that question on a moment by moment basis.
Can we go off subject just for a second? It's
All right.
something interesting, right? So if you look at the, and I'm not saying any of this is true. It's just an interesting perspective, right, about the environment and carbon, right? So it's like you have all this oil underground, right? All that is carbon. It used to be living things in the past, right?
Yeah.
And so human beings, through our culture and the evolution of our society and blah blah blah, we suck it up, we burn it, and we put it into the atmosphere. Basically, all this carbon, right? So now the carbon that used to be lost is underground. It's now bioavailable in the atmosphere, right? And so it's causing the effect of that is there's a global greening that's happening right now. The temperatures are rising, and then like a shitload more vegetation is starting to grow. And it's like we're having like this unconsciously we're bioengineering the environment to be, in the future, the effect would be more complex biodiversity, right? Not destruction. Is because we're making all this carbon that is the building blocks for life available again in the biosphere, right? When it was trapped underneath the ground.
Right.
Yeah, and so I know that's an interesting way to look at it. It's actually the effect of all this pollution in burning all these fossil fuels might just end up creating a much better world. Who knows?
Yeah. It's. I agree. That's an interesting perspective, and part of what's interesting about it to me, two things. One is it's pretty far out and weird, and contrary to the consensus around the subject matter, right? But the other part.
Well, no, it's exactly what's happening, though. There's a global greening going on, and it's because of the increased amount of carbon in the atmosphere.
Well, I'm not saying that there isn't greater vegetation growing in some places because of the carbon, but there's also less vegetation growing in other places because of the change in temperature. So, but my point is that perspective, it presents another piece of nuance that I think tends to get filtered out in the black and whiteness way of thinking. And that right now we have the people who are black and white, over on the side of, it doesn't matter, eat, drink, and make merry. And then on the other side is the people say, it absolutely matters. Look how terrible it is. They're catastrophizing. One is toxic positivity, I think, and the other is toxic negativity. And meanwhile, the reality is someplace in the middle. But it's only people who are willing to entertain perspectives that are alien to their perspective can be in the middle. And that's what you just did. It's like you can look at two different perspectives that are inconsistent with each other. But you don't have to discard one in order to entertain the merits of another. And look at the merit of the different perspectives of what's going on. And that's what people in the middle, the consciousness that's in the middle, is capable of doing. I don't see much of that middle consciousness, but there could be a lot of it, but it's not sensational enough for media to be picking it up and covering it.
Yeah, I think most people are captured by, including scientists and intellectuals, are narrative captured. They don't actually, they appear to be thinking for themselves, but actually, no, they're just captured by a particular narrative.
There's a huge, even I would say, a leaderless conspiracy among what we call, the scientific community, that's turning science into scientism.
Yeah, big time. I agree with that. 100%.
But now even that is coming back up, or not back up, but it's coming closer to the surface.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
and it's being seen. And the true scientists, the people who aren't using science to grind an axe, that just like in religion, there are people who practice religion for what religion is suited for, is fit, evolution, selective of the fittest, right? They use religion for what religion is a useful thing to use it for, right? And then there are people who use religion for very, I would say, neurotic and destructive, even self-destructive um, uh, uh, outcome. That they're they're using it for an alternative purpose than what its highest purpose could be. And the same, so you take any kind of mechanism or technology. In the case of religion, I would refer to that as a kind of a psychotechnology, psychological technology, and anything that can be used to create, to form, to bring into being, can be used for good or ill.
I think spiritual technology is appropriate too. The religion.
Sure, spiritual, maybe even more suited. For me, that has a better connotation than psychotechnology. And but anyway, so that we have the power to use the power of our consciousness. We have the ability or capacity to use our consciousness to advance well-being, collective well-being, communal well-being, right? That's always an option.
Yeah.
But if we have the option to use it for good, we necessarily have the same option, the same agency to use it for ill.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing other than the I am, can make that choice. Now, I can make that choice. The I am within myself can make that choice and say, no, I'm not making that choice.
That brings up a really interesting thought for me.
Yeah.
Because, like, you take all these World Economic Forum guys, like Kyle, Schwab, and, they have, I think, good intentions to where they're extremely worried about the environment. They see consumer capitalism as a failed culture where most people, like in the U.S., are depressed, they're fat, unhealthy. We're destroying, the oceans, the lands, everything, right? And so they've come up with a plan, I think, on how to fix that. But a lot of their plan has to do with centralized power, right? Sort of overriding the autonomous authority of each state.
Overriding agency.
Right, overriding agency.
Yeah.
And so, like, not to get too much into detail because we're already almost an hour in, but my conclusion is that we have to move forward as free individuals, or we perish. Right.
Yes.
So I think the centralized authority thing is always going to fail because it's always going to lead to corruption and destruction, in my opinion.
It leads to concentrated power, and it takes extraordinary ethics for powerful people to not use that power in destructive ways.
Right, and I think it's always failed because it's how flawed we are as human beings. I mean, just if you imagine being in the workplace, I've seen this happen where you have a friend, right? They're you have a good relationship with them, they're really cool or something like that, and then they get promoted, just one step up to supervisor or something like that, and their personality completely transforms. Right?
Is that right?
Yeah, they come completely unable to reason anymore. They think their authority creates reality, right? And anything that contradicts them.
I mean, that's part of our state of consciousness is that happens. We go into a kind of a trance, and we can see in other people, but when we're doing it ourselves, a characteristic of a trance is that you don't know you're in the trance.
Right. And then you like if you think about like in groups in high school, the popular kids, right? And they kind of bully the other kids and make them feel bad about themselves and stuff like that because you have this in group who's superior to everyone else, right?
Right.
It's like the same kind of shit happens, you know, with intellectuals or billionaires or something like that. They create these in groups, you know, their minds get completely overtaken by this. I don't even know what you would call it. Mind virus, I guess.
It is a lot like a virus,
right?
And it creates this. Well, it's within the realm of what people refer to as ego, is my observation, but it's a peculiar kind of ego, where it can't check itself.
Right.
It could even be maybe it's a lowering of self-consciousness, of where you stop being concerned about how you look to other people, or certainly you lose concern about how well am I functioning as a member of the group. You get caught up in it's a fantasy. It's an imaginary world where you have this sense of superiority,
right.
As an individual. What's the middle school phrase is he thought he was hot shit. Actually, it was just a warmed over turd.
Right. Yeah, it's something.
It's a very crude, but nonetheless, it really says what happens. And I don't say that as an accusation. I just say it as a condition. I spend my own time in my own grandiosity.
Yeah.
I know, after 80 years of studying this stuff, you learn something, right? And one of the things I've learned is that I do all of the things that human beings do. And, at least, to some degree. So, I'm unworthy of self-acclaimed righteousness.
Yeah, well, it's like elitism. There's like some sort of elitism leads to dehumanization of the other.
That's right.
And then you have when you get elitism and utopianism sort of mixed together, like these guys, the World Economic Forum and stuff like that. That's a recipe for total disaster.
Yeah.
So
we see that, and we've done enough revolutions now with this, this brave new world. Well, that's not the good phrase to use for it, but the revolution in Russia and other socialist revolutions, and those serve as experiments with what happens when we have centralized control.
Right.
And the problem with socialism isn't the mutual aspect of it, or the communism, the mutual aspect of it. The problem is that in order to implement it, in order to override individual people making individual choices, you have to have totalitarian control. And totalitarian control becomes corrupt.
Right. Yep.
And I think it's unreasonable. It's unfair to expect leaders to be of such superior moral character that they wouldn't get seduced into their own grandiosity. It's unfair. It's unrealistic, and so we have to hold on. That, to me, we've stumbled across why is democracy, as bad as it is, why is it our best known method of governance?
Yeah, and I think
because it has inherent checks and balances that keeps things from becoming too centralized control.
Ernest Becker talks a lot about what's called ego death, right? And but he uses like homeless people as sort of the example. I think there's a couple kinds of
the example of what?
Of ego death, like
death.
It's kind of like an existential crisis where you see yourself as completely unable to, extract any sort of sense of self-esteem or meaning from the culture, right?
Right.
And you have a stronger need to believe that meaning and purpose in reality exist, and so you turn the judgment on your own self, your shortcomings, and you'd rather judge and hate yourself than to
self-loathing,
to reject reality, the reality of the cultural framework.
right?
Anyways, I think there's a few. That's like an example of an existential crisis, but I think there's another existential crisis on the opposite end of the spectrum, where very successful people also have an existential crisis because a lot of the anxiety relieving aspects of culture are, inaction. So as you're trying to achieve, cultural success, it's the activity that relieves the anxiety, right? But once you achieve power, you achieve status, you achieve money, you have all these things. The anxiety is thrust back upon you, right? And I think that this relieves very successful people uniquely vulnerable to like toxic worldviews and negating of the masses or whatever. Like it leaves them susceptible to utopian ideology, to elitism, to damn it, I've been talking too long. My brain's almost done. But you get what I'm saying, right? It's just,
no, I get it.
Yeah, the existential crisis makes them uniquely vulnerable to harming others. To make some radicalizes them, makes them more susceptible to elitism.
I'd want to include in that in the harming of people is not recognizing that it's harmful, the inability to recognize that it's a perpetration.
Right. Well, they dehumanize.
I had this interesting insight last night about death, and don't remember what it was related to, and doesn't matter. But I realized that I don't hold life so sacred that the taking of life is an atrocity. But when you take a life, you take agency away. You violate the agency. And to me, that agency, this was a bit of an aha about myself, is that how high I hold agency, the ability to make a choice, the ability to choose is the core of what agency is, for better or worse. There's no guarantee of wisdom that comes with the ability to choose. But to me, that is the essence of human existence. Is that what we call agency? And to violate that agency, now I'm remembering a conversation we had back a ways about this very thing, about how I have this hyper sensitivity to canceling or manipulating or violating a person's agency.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like it's my God. It's of the highest sanctity, or it's of that realm. There may be other things that are that high also, but anyway, so I just had this insight that it's not the taking of the life that is so, because life does that already anyway, right?
Yeah.
But if I, as an agent of my own being, or within my own being, I have agency, and I use my agency to violate your agency, that's the greatest terrible thing that I could do.
Can I paraphrase what you're saying?
Sure, that would be good.
So
I don't know. Can you paraphrase all that? Let's see.
Well, how I think about it is so if you try to imagine what the experience of AI would be like when it becomes self-aware, right? And I think that happens to human beings multiple times throughout their lives, right? Where they
what is it that happens multiple times?
the waking up, the becoming self-aware, right?
Yeah, okay.
Right. In this becoming, in this waking up, becoming self-aware, I think is the a part of it is becoming more and more willful, becoming more of an
Yeah.
agent within this biological system, right?
Right,
And becoming
yeah.
more conscious. And I think
Yeah.
that what makes human life special, even invaluable, the most valuable thing probably on earth, even the criminals, the murderers, the rapists, and these things, is the potential that exists for the
Agency for good.
right, or the waking up. You know, damn it, I can't articulate myself right now, but you get what I'm saying. There's this
Yeah,
potential
no,
that exists.
I'm with you, and yes, yeah, you're paraphrasing what I was saying,
Yeah.
and that all human beings have the potential for agency
And
for
to become
well-being.
self-aware, right? To become an agent and to become self-aware. I think a lot of humanity is teetering on the edge of being, you know, almost a biological computer that's not self-aware, and becoming like a natural intelligence, autonomous being, right? I think there's a lot of teetering going on. But I think every human being has the potential to sort of, you know, start weighing towards the other, and then waking up. Yeah.
In that waking up and becoming more self-aware, there are at least two potentials. One is that self-awareness, discovering agency and using it for good, for well-being, mutual well-being. The other potential is the waking up, discovering becoming self-aware, and self-aware of agency, the ability to choose, and going a direction other than for well-being, because there's neutral, and then there's and then there's actually doing things that the delusion is how grand I am. I'm forcing the whole world to comply to my utopian fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
right? But actually, that's very destructive. Forcing everybody to, well, one, it isn't going to happen. It's if it could happen, maybe it would be worth it. But we know from the research done so far, these grand experiments called revolutions, we know from that there's nothing indicating that can work that way, right? But either way, we have two potentials in that waking up. And
I see things a little different than that.
So that is what necessitates ethics.
I think that this might be a little bit religious, like, perspective. I don't know, maybe for your taste, but I see like consciousness has properties, right? And those properties are like kindness, forgiveness, empathy. All of these things are natural properties of consciousness, right? And so, therefore, the natural result of becoming more conscious, more awake, is becoming more compassionate, more forgiving, more empathetic, and stuff like that. So, I don't see that the waking up, to me, is always in a positive direction. It's never going to be in a negative direction, because I think that, yeah, like I just said, that these positive attributes are imbued in consciousness. They're properties of consciousness, and becoming more conscious makes you more of these things.
Yeah.
So I think these people are not conscious, the ones you're talking about. They might be be intelligent.
Go back to your phrase, aren't conscious. What?
You said there's two possibilities in the waking up, right? One is for negative, one's for positive, right? I would suggest that the people who are doing harmful things, or violent, or creating toxic narratives and trying to gain control and power and all this kind of stuff, I would say that they're not awake. They haven't achieved consciousness, or they haven't
Well,
had the awakening.
they've achieved to a degree, but I think I agree with you that we're getting a little bit absolutist here, but
Yeah,
we can
yeah.
entertain that as a possibility. Um, um, to the degree that they let's see, let me stop and back up. There are a lot of people who are become powerful and put together utopian, um, grandiose ideas, even participate in leading revolutions or participate in being part of the revolution and whatnot. And they're working from a very primitive place.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's very little enlightenment
Right.
going on there.
Even they might
So
think they're enlightened, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it has to do with delusion.
Yeah.
And again, not delusion as something wrong with a person, but delusion as in being in an imaginary trance that you don't know is an imaginary trance. To me,
Right.
that's what a delusion is. So an awful lot of that is what's going on. And so when I said there's two possibilities, I think you raised hold it, wait a minute, there might be an exception there, because maybe in the waking up and becoming aware, it so I'm
It necessarily points you or pushes you in the direction of the more positive.
it I I would agree that there's a tendency, and that if you go to the negative, you've just fallen back asleep. You've just gone back
Yeah.
into a trance. You wake up, you discover agency, and you take that knowledge of agency back into a trance.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like you wake up and then you stay awake. It's easy to become deluded again.
It is.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
easy. And in fact, in my experience of awakening, the evolution of my consciousness within my lifetime, because my consciousness has definitely evolved. So I know that society, the consciousness of society for the last 80 years has evolved by the factor of one, because I know how my consciousness has evolved, and I'm a piece of that larger consciousness. But that's a sidebar. Coming back to that in that evolution, kind of like you're talking about the development of culture and its flourishing and then its demise and violence and whatnot. Well, that same thing happens in the personal. The same thing happened in my consciousness and the evolution of my consciousness and my personal culture is that there'd be an illumination and an awakening and a seeing of something, and then I would go into another delusion. In fact, I wrote a poem about this. My soul, I am, I dream alive, is the title of the poem, and it's where I was recognizing, in writing the poem, I recognized that I breathe life into my being that animates my life. With visions and dreams and ideas and possibilities, and it was about how I'd have an awakening, I have a dream, and it breathed me alive, and then I'd take off running with it, and then it would hit its own demise, like that cultural cycle you were talking about. But over time, I can look back and I can see how each one of those delusional dreams then became one more iteration in the evolution of my consciousness, because eventually I realized I'd outrun the length of the pier. I'd outrun reality, and reality has a way of always showing up, and
Yeah.
and then that's the demise, and there's a kind of existential violence that can go on, certainly self-loathing, and then after that settles down, then I start waking up again.
Yeah, so it's like multiple awakenings, and it's always continuous. Yeah.
And I put it in a Christian tradition as the rebirth, being born again, is not a single event.
Yeah.
It's sometimes identifiable moments in a continuum of being born again, 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 again.
Can I say one more thing that's a little bit off
Sure.
topics but relates to this human potential thing that we're talking
Yeah.
about? So, but anyways, so what I see as the value is that potential. I think you see the same thing. The value of human
Right.
life is that potential. But there was a study. I mean, there's so much bullshit online. It's so hard to sit through. But
Yeah.
I think it's a legit study that they went and they wanted to figure out the IQs of like brain surgeons. I think it was brain surgeons and rocket scientists. They wanted to see how much smarter the average brain surgeon was in rocket science compared to the general population. Right? Turns out they're not. They're average. So they don't have a higher IQ than the average population. And I thought, wow, that's very, very interesting. How much a person of average intelligence can achieve, right? How much potential that exists for everybody out there. So everybody that exists that has
not everybody, but
for most people, right? The average, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like how much of our own potential that we never realize, we don't even know exists, because we don't put ourselves in a position to find out. Right.
Yeah. Well, it goes back. Yeah. It goes. We don't find out because of that ancient teaching about living in an illusion of reality. I mean, we go back to Buddhism and even prior to Buddhism, and every one of the philosophers that were the source of that model or framework of thinking referred to some form of being in an illusion and living in a way that we can't see what's actually there right before us, particularly in a spiritual or psychological sense in terms of seeing what our potential is. Right. So the idea is to wake up from those illusions, to be able to break the spell of the trance.
Yeah, so that's a good thing. A lot of people wonder, what is it that's sacred about being a human being? And that's a good answer. What's sacred about being a human being is the potential, even if it remains unrealized.
I would agree with that, but I wouldn't make that a universal truth, because to me, what is sacred to me? What is sacred about human beings to me?
Yeah, well, that's a good one, right?
It's definitely potential, and the access to that potential is agency. So I just picked up, this thing that we do, where I have conversations with you that I get to learn things that just wouldn't happen in a conversation with other people, and I just had one of those. Is that so? It's like the agency is to be protected at all possible.
Yeah.
But why? Because that's the aperture into the potential.
Right. Yeah. And so we either move forward as free individuals or we perish. As a species. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would want to qualify that a little bit by saying we either move forward with some degree of agency, some degree of free will, or will perish.
Yeah. Well, I just mean from a social political perspective, I think maximizing individual liberty seems to be the right direction.
I think there's a lot of experiment that supports that.
But we just have to take a more proactive approach to education, right? I think I don't think a lot of the world's problems would be all that hard to solve if we just had everyone's buy-in. But it starts with a powerful leader that can excite people about it. I don't think we have to have
everybody. If we just had a few more really good thinkers,
right.
Critical thinkers, of average intelligence.
Right.
If we just had a few hundred or thousand more of those people, actively engaged on a daily basis on how do we do this, right? And then as I said that, I realized, well, okay, that's not exactly that. That could be it, but more so, I think that if we could have a few of the thousands of people who are actively on a day-to-day basis pondering and thinking through this and applying critical thinking to this social condition that we have. If we had a few thousand of those people in a higher level of influence, because right now because I'm in that group of people, we're kind of down here in terms of who's listening to what.
Well, we're trying to join the public conversation with this podcast, right?
No. Now, hang on a second. We're not trying.
Oh, we
have.
Yeah.
This is number 9. So 9 times we've had a conversation that the intent behind the conversation is to present things, information and insights to people that could be useful to some people that advance the Aquarian cause, to advance a more civil way of living with ourselves, in our vertical conversation with ourselves and with each other in the horizontal, to be more civil, to be more compassionate, to come from a place of love. To me, that's the starting point, because I can choose to come from a place of love. I have more agency over what my basic attitude or my ground of being is, and I can come from a place of deep personal care and concern for mutual well-being at will, more so than hardly anything else. And I can't, the part that I can't do, I ain't gonna do it. It ain't gonna happen. So I'll just do the part that I can do. And I think that includes you. And that, making that available, what I just said there, and elevating consciousness of what I just said, is part of why I have these conversations with you. And I think it's part of why you have the conversation. It's a central part of why we're publishing this and not just having this with a cup of coffee or a beer. So, we're taking what little we have and we're putting it out there on the track to let it run. And we're not the only ones, so we're contributing to a current that's larger than what we are by doing it. But that's not trying.
Right.
See, that's what I took exception to, is when you say, well, we're trying to do this by publishing it. No, we're doing it. That I don't think, that's kind of an absolute statement. It says we're doing it, but I don't think that's delusional. I think it's accurate to.
Right. I think what I'm saying is, when I say trying to, is like we still don't have a lot of viewers, so we're trying to expand our reach and
okay.
stuff like
So
that.
I just did this geek thing that I do. I pick on irrelevant incidentals. So context, in the context in which you said try, I seized that as an opportunity to jump up to the pulpit or on my soapbox. But you're right. We're working at it. Try as in working at it.
Right. Well, I think we're about an hour and a half in now, so maybe we can call it there.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you made it this far, if you're in between the 5 and 16% that make it to the end, thanks for sticking in, and we'll see you next time in number 10.
Okay, then I guess that's it, folks.